Hello everyone, Stealthy Sharon here, and today we're taking a look at the Humble Choice Bundle for September 2021. My process for this is I play each game for roughly about an hour, and then I tell you my thoughts on them, and ultimately if they were worth your time. This month was a doozy. Stick with me and find out which ones I thought were good, and other ones you could just pass up. Please check the timestamps if you want to look at a particular game, and be sure to listen to my final thoughts in the end. Alright, without any further ado, let's get to it. First off, we have the Framed Collection, which is the original Framed title and its sequel. At its core, Framed is a puzzle game, but with a unique presentation. The game plays out as a comic book, which is stylized and animated in a gorgeous noir theme. The silhouetted animations play out smoothly, and I thought they were a lot of fun to watch, even if you got the puzzle incorrect. And what I mean by that is the player has to rearrange the frames in such a way so the main character can move forward in the story. If they get caught or have an unfortunate slip-up, then the player has to reassess what went wrong and rearrange the frames. At first, this is a very simple task, but each page brings about more complexity. Sometimes you have to pay attention to what's in the frame and how they might work together. Other times, it's a cause and effect head-scratcher where if this happens, then it will trigger this, and then trigger this, and oh wait, let me try that again. Eventually, you have other elements introduced, like rotating the pieces or reusing them. I played both games in the collection, and in the hour I played, I got through about a third in each of them. I'm not really good at puzzle games, and I ended up getting stuck in the first, which is the main reason why I jumped over to the second game. I think anyone who likes the look of this game should try this out, even if they aren't into puzzle games. Orwell, Ignorance is Strength, is an investigative story game where you play the role of some sort of detective working for a top-secret security branch of the government. I was pretty lost playing this game at first, but it did get a little better as I played. The plot, as I understand it, is that a high-ranking military officer of a neighboring country has gone missing. He also happens to be working for the main character's country and acts as an informant. The player has to figure out the truth of what's going on and report this back to their supervisor. You do this through scouring the web and personal files on computers and phones, all in the security system known as Orwell. With each bit of data that you upload, the player can create a fuller picture of the people and the situation. But you need to be careful. Some bits of information can be extraneous, or just flat out wrong, and what you upload can affect the final outcome. It's the player's job to determine what's valuable and integral to the investigation. I thought this game was just alright. At times, it was cool figuring out the little pieces of the story, but usually I was stuck and just started to click on everything to see if the game would progress. Also, this is the second game in a series, which I thought was an odd choice to put in the bundle. If I played the first game, maybe I wouldn't be so lost. But then again, maybe the first game has no real bearing on Ignorance is Strength. If you're someone who likes to piece together information and conceptualize it into a larger picture, then this might be something for you. However, I'll pass on this game myself. A lot of the writing and sleuthing would just be wasted on me. The next game is Fort Triumph, a turn-based strategy that blends XCOM-style combat with Heroes of Might and Magic overworld exploration. I didn't experience much of the story in Fort Triumph, but from what I did see, it's a game that doesn't take itself too seriously. It's a lighthearted story with humor sprinkled throughout. I didn't mind the attempts at humor and thought it worked well enough with its vibrant and colorful visuals. The player controls a party of 3 heroes at the start who are trying to find work. Through exploration and combat, they'll level up and you'll gain more resources to upgrade buildings at your fort, which provide buffs to your party. Eventually, you can gain more heroes, which you'll create into multiple adventuring parties to explore the map and defeat enemies. Within combat, it plays out as a turn-based strategy. You have to keep in mind the positioning of your heroes and what kind of cover they're behind. If you get flanked, then that could be really bad. The environment plays a very important role too, because your cover can be destroyed, and also used to harm you. Luckily, you could do the same to your opponents, so you'll need to keep all that into consideration. This game was a real surprise for me. I don't think anything in this game is particularly unique, but it seems to do everything well. I'm a fan of tactical turn-based strategy, and I liked what I played, so I'm sure this one I'll be coming back to at some point. Next up is Swag and Sorcery, which is an RPG management game where you train up a bunch of heroes and build up a village to help them out. The story is fairly simple and plays up a humorous tone and... Wait a minute, didn't I just talk about this game? Unlike Fort Triumph though, Swag and Sorcery plays a lot differently, in that you don't really play the game at all. The gameplay loop goes a little something like this. You have some heroes, make some equipment or consumables for them if you have the resources, make sure they're equipped with the best gear you have for them. Finally, make sure everyone is healed and rested up before setting them out on an adventure. They then go to the location and fight off monsters and collect more resources for you. But you can't really do anything to affect the outcome. At least not in the beginning of the game. You just watch them and wait. There's a feature to pull them out before they die in hopes to save a selected resource you gathered, but that's really it. And death for them isn't really a big deal. You have to heal them back up to full or just wait for their health to come back. And there's a lot of waiting. Especially when you need to grind for all these resources to make better armor, or create potions, or build a new structure in your town. The whole game felt very much like a mobile game. I was so convinced that it was something they ported to PC that I just checked to see if it was originally for mobile. But it's not. I think this game might get better as you get further into it because you'll have more heroes to do stuff with. So maybe you'll be able to do some management in town while another party is out adventuring. Also, it looks like you can unlock spells later, so that might give a little more hands-on with the fights. Ultimately, I just don't think this is something that I'd want to play long-term. If the game is already this much of a grind, I can't imagine how much it will be later on. I think this game might be good for someone who just wants to play while they're doing other things and wants a largely hands-off experience. But that's not really what I want in a game. Heaven's Vault is an adventure game with a sci-fi setting rich with world building and lore. You play as an archaeologist trying to find a missing person while using your knowledge of history and language to figure things out. Visually, I thought the game looked nice, but I felt the main character's movement were a bit jarring. The walking felt stiff at times, and they kinda leave this after image when she stops and moves. I know this was done purposely, though I'm not really sure why. I imagine it's supposed to be representing things in the past or something. I found it a bit weird though. That aside, the story is what makes this game so interesting. Or more specifically, all the world building put into the game. This game's setting was obviously made from the ground up to have a rich and deep lore and history. While playing, you can access the timeline, which dates from the present and the actions that happened to the main character, all the way back to an ancient era thousands of years before. Every time you find out more information or recall something, then it gets logged on the timeline. The language puzzle was another main feature of the game. Throughout playing, I came across several hieroglyphic-like words where I needed to use the knowledge I gained from previous words or from the world's history to try and decipher what they meant. It's a brilliant system, and even when you think you might have figured out what the words mean, you might find something later that changes your mind. It will put a question mark by a word you're not 100% sure of until you have further evidence to corroborate your translation. I thought the dialogue was pretty good as well, and there's a lot of it. I especially liked the banter between Aaliyah, the main character, and her robot, Six. If you like games with a lot of world building and unique settings, then this one is a must-play. I greatly enjoyed what I played here, so this one is definitely an easy recommendation from me. Atomicrops is a roguelite blend between farming simulator and bullet hell style games. Yes, a farming simulator mixed with bullet hell. It's a unique idea. The world has turned into a nuclear wasteland, and now you must grow crops to help the town survive, while also fighting off a vast assortment of mutated creatures that want to take your crops for themselves. The game's art style is bright and colorful. It would feel so inviting if it wasn't for the fact that just about everything wants to kill you. Each day takes place over the span of about a few minutes, with half of that being daytime, where you have to try and explore the nearby areas to get more seeds to plant. By nighttime, you need to get back to your plot to plant your seeds, water them, and fight off all the baddies that want to eat them or kill you. If you survive the night, a helicopter will come to pick you up and take you into town. Here, you could spend your currency to get new weapons and crops, or spend your roses to woo potential partners. Each season lasts only 3 days. On the 3rd day, you'll face a boss, and if you survive, there'll be a festival back in town. The mayor rewards the player based on how much food they were able to provide. Then, rinse and repeat. I thought this was a super chaotic game, but quite a bit of fun just based on the premise alone. Although, I didn't have a lot of time to think, so much of my playtime was a frantic rush, without any real strategy or good choices for weapons or items. In the beginning, this can be frustrating, but I think over time it might become easier to decide on what's best for your playstyle. The biggest missed opportunity with Atomicrops is it doesn't have any multiplayer. I thought this game would be perfect for something like that, but unfortunately it's not a thing. I like this one though, and would suggest giving it a try if it looked interesting to you. Next is another roguelite game called West of Dead. It's a cover-based twin-stick shooter where you explore the depths of purgatory. As the name obviously implies, it has a western theme to it, but it's very dark, filled with monsters and the supernatural. And literally dark. The visuals use darkness as a mood setter and a gameplay mechanic. In the many rooms where your shootouts will take place, there are sometimes lights you can ignite to illuminate your surroundings and blind enemies. I thought this was a cool effect. The shooting mechanics are really responsive and fun. Experimenting with different guns was cool, and I think having different levels for guns and their stats was a smart idea. It becomes really easy to get attached to a particular kind of weapon because you like how it feels. However, if you get offered a higher level gun that's different from what you already have, you might be tempted to change up your loadout just for the increase in damage. I will say that the game felt fairly easy. I didn't die once in my time with it, and made it through 3 areas. I was only in Chapter 1 though, so I imagine there's still a lot left and a lot more opportunities for me to die. West of Dead was a fun game, and I'm sure it will provide some hours of entertainment even if you don't finish it. Oh, and another plus was the voice work, which was done by Ron Perlman, so there's that too.
Here I was again. Either Death was getting lazy, or he had other plans for me.
But if this one roguelite didn't tickle your fancy, we still have one more later on in the bundle. Narita Boy is a platforming action-adventure game set in a world of code and fantasy. You play as Narita Boy, a hero foretold to come and save the digital kingdom from him. From this red guy right here. His name is literally him. Anyway, you're tasked with retrieving the 13 memories of the creator, who is the programmer that created the digital kingdom. Each of these memories reveal a bit more about the creator's life. I only unlocked one, but I couldn't help but feel like it was going to be a story that might pull at your heartstrings. Not a bad or good thing, but just an observation and a feeling I had from viewing the first memory. The game's visual style is very flashy, but I think the presentation is pretty good. I like the music they had in the game as well, which, as you can expect just from the visuals, it has a very synthy sound to it. Gameplay-wise, I did think it was fun, but the movement felt a little too floaty for me. I didn't have too many issues with it, but I could see a particularly hard platforming section being very frustrating. Luckily, the game seems to be very forgiving too. Every time I died, I would usually respawn on the same screen I died on, or somewhere very close, so there wasn't a lot of downtime. Narita Boy reminded me of the Messenger while playing this. The controls are not nearly as tight as the Messenger, but they were still fun along with a great soundtrack. I want to come back to this one, and if you're interested, then you should try it out for yourself. Next is the adventure game Roki, which involves a sister trying to find her brother in a world of myth and legends. The game's visuals and setting are probably the most interesting features here. The world takes inspiration from Nordic folklore, so you'll have things like giants and trolls. Because of this, it's set in a forested, snowy world filled with all sorts of supernatural things. The graphic design is gorgeous, and I'd love to play more solely to see the different areas the game features. The story so far is fairly standard, but it's easy to relate to. It follows a girl named Tuve, who takes care of her little brother, Lars. Her father is around, but my guess probably works a lot to take care of the both of them since their mother passed away. So, Tuve does all she can to help. One night, a giant attacks their house for some reason, and takes Lars through this mystical portal. Of course, you, as Tuve, follows through, and from there your journey properly begins. This is about as far as I got. I thought the puzzles were fairly intuitive and easy enough to figure out, but that might not always be the case. It's a game where you have items and must combine them or click to use them on certain objects in the world. That type of mechanic has always been frustrating for me, because the solution might not be easily presented. Also, I thought the controls were a bit weird with trying to drag things to where you want them to go. But that's more of a nitpick. Overall, I think if the folklore setting isn't something that immediately grabs you, then I'm not sure how much is here to actually give this one a go. I probably will come back to this at some point, but I'm not in any big rush. Not for Broadcast is an FMV game, full motion video, where you play as a broadcaster in a news show studio. Your job is to air the right screens at appropriate times, censor words, and make sure the connection is stable. It's a unique idea, but I'll just be completely upfront here. It wasn't for me at all. I've never been a fan of FMV games. To me, I never liked the idea of having live action stuff in a video game because it always felt weird to me. I think the only FMV game that I liked, that I remember playing, was a Star Trek game where you encountered the Borg. Does anyone actually remember that, or even know what I'm talking about? Anyway, looking at this a bit more objectively, I thought the gameplay might be fun for people who really want something different. It actually was pretty hectic trying to switch between screens and air the right stuff. Not to mention, there's a larger story going on throughout these shows, which revolves around a radical political party taking control of the government. Your choices, based on what you choose to air or not, impacts the country's future. It's pretty heavy stuff, and I can see the appeal. Also, I thought it was fun to go back to the old broadcasts and watch some of the backroom talk that you don't really get a chance to hear when airing live. It's a nice touch. The actors all seem to play their parts brilliantly, and I'm sure to those interested that this will probably be a nice treat. For me, it's just not my cup of tea, and I'm sure I won't be returning to this one. The final roguelite of the bundle is Neon Abyss, which is a platformer where you shoot and clear enemies going from room to room. Throughout a run, you get all sorts of different power-ups and guns that change the way you play. At the end of a run, when you eventually die, you gain some sort of currency that you could use for upgrades or to unlock new characters. The story here seems non-existent. It starts with a guy named Hades asking you if you want revenge, and then you're thrown into your first level. No explanation to what the actual dungeons are or why you're even in a bar when you die. I suppose maybe you'll find that out later. But I think the gameplay is what makes or breaks a roguelike game. So, is it any fun? Yeah, definitely. I liked running into new items and seeing what they could do, although honestly a lot of the times it just seemed like it was a passive boost. Some items will have active abilities that can let you do different things, like flying. The difficulty seemed just right on normal for me. It wasn't so easy that I was having no real issues, like West of Dead, but wasn't so difficult that I felt I couldn't make much progression, like in Atomicrops. Another thing I liked about Neon Abyss was the enemies don't seem to hurt you unless their attacks actually land and not if they merely just touch you. Furthermore, the game's pickups would stay in a room until you collected them, so you could do a little backtracking if you took a lot of damage to go and pick up those heart containers you left lying around because you didn't need them at the time. I had a lot of fun with this one. If you're looking for a fast-paced shooter platformer, then I think Neon Abyss could scratch that itch. PGA Tour 2K21 is a golfing game about golf. That's really all there is to it. But just to make this clear before I start, I don't know the slightest thing about golf. I've never played a golf video game or played golf in real life. Unless you count mini golf, in which case then I played a super fun multiplayer game called Golf It. And I have been to a mini golf course a few times. So, I'm basically not the target audience here. I went into this game expecting full well that it wasn't going to be for me. With that being said, I was actually pleasantly surprised with it. First off, the game throws you into an intimidating tutorial. It's one of those where if you keep on failing at what they want you to do, then they ask you to repeat it over and over again, even if you're not entirely sure what's going on. Luckily, I managed to get through it and was already getting scared from all the different things you need to take into account, like different clubs, shot types, drawing or fading your shots, and yeah. It was a lot for someone who doesn't know the first thing about golf. Once you get past the tutorial though, it presents you with a character creator. Cool. I know how to use one of those. And then you select a difficulty and your first event of your golfing career. I was pretty happy that the game had a difficulty setting. It let me go for something more my speed. So in my first game of golf, it would suggest my clubs, allow me to see indicators of where my ball would end up, and provide me with helpful tips relevant to my situation. Eventually, I got more comfortable trying to experiment with different things, like adjusting my shots for wind direction. Honestly, I think that was a better tutorial. I mean, I still failed miserably. My score, I imagine, is horrendously bad. Although, I don't know that for sure. Once again, no clue about golf. But the game seemed inviting enough for me to actually want to come back to it, if only to play something completely different from what I'm used to. I'm sure this already goes without saying, but if you like golf, then you should check this one out. Okay, so we reached the end of the video, so let's wrap this up and see if this bundle is worth it or not. I based my rating solely on whether I thought the game was worth playing on about an hour or so of hands-on gameplay. I feel that with most games, an hour should be enough time to determine if it's something I'd like. And I'm really judging their worth as to whether I feel you should invest any time into said game. Overall, this bundle is really a mixed bag. Many of these games were fun, but they just didn't stand out as something that I would go out and wholeheartedly recommend. And if last month's headliners were weak, then I'm not even sure how to classify these. Both PGA 2K21 and Not for Broadcast seem like games that would only appeal to specific niche audiences. Neon Abyss might be something more for the mainstream audiences, but I don't think it's a very big title. I would only pick this bundle up if there are at least 2 or 3 games that interest you. Otherwise, I think it might be better just to wait for a sale on whatever specific game you're looking at. This month, I only had one top pick that really stood out to me, and that was Heaven's Vault. I don't really play adventure games like this very much, but I was really impressed with this one. The world building was top-notch, and the mechanics surrounding history and language were really interesting. It'll be fun to uncover more lore about the game's unique setting. I think the easiest recommendations after that were Neon Abyss and Fort Triumph. Both of these had great gameplay formulas. Neon Abyss's roguelite loop felt great and compels the player to keep going for the sole sake of getting one step farther and getting some more experience to buy upgrades. Fort Triumph offers a fun turn-based strategy with the environment as an added tactical layer, as well as an overworld map to explore. I wouldn't say either is offering anything new, but they do what they set out to do very well, and I had a good amount of fun with them. After that, we start heading into the no man's land of this bundle. PGA Tour 2K21, Roki, West of Dead, Atomicrops, Narita Boy, and Framed were all games that were fun, but I wouldn't recommend unless you were looking for that specific kind of game. PGA Tour is obvious. If you're into golf, then play this game. I'd suggest Roki for an adventure game with a Nordic folklore flair. The game looks nice, but I didn't feel that its story did enough to hook me, especially with so many other games using Nordic influences. West of Dead and Atomicrops both had fun offerings, but I think maybe I'm just a bit tired of the roguelites that have populated every bundle since I started reviewing Humble Choice. Neon Abyss was definitely the best of the three, so that's why I place West of Dead and Atomicrops here. Narita Boy is good for people who want a platforming adventure game similar to something like The Messenger. Inevitably, I kept on thinking of comparisons between the two, and just felt that Narita Boy wasn't at that level. That might not be fair to Narita Boy, but that's ultimately how I felt. Finally, Framed was a nice diversion, but quite honestly, I was a step away from not even bothering to recommend it. Its unique cause and effect puzzles and noir style elevates it to something that could warrant an hour or two. And finally, in our final placements, I'd put Orwell, Ignorance is Strength, Not for Broadcast, and Swag and Sorcery as games I really wouldn't bother with. Again, it is based on my own preferences. I do think all of these games have their own merits, but they just weren't for me. Orwell revolves around investigation and largely is displayed through text, and Not for Broadcast Story centers on telling it through FMVs. Both mediums aren't something that I prefer in video games, especially in the way it was presented in both games. Swag and Sorcery is for the person who wants to play a game with minimal effort while they do something else. I have other games that I could use for that purpose, and personally didn't feel Swag and Sorcery was that special. Anyway, these were my thoughts on this month's bundle. This was a really hard month to try and make any definitive statements on the games. But what do you think? Let me know what your thoughts are, or if there are any different recommendations you'd make in the comments below. Thanks for watching! I hope this video helped you in some way, and if it did, then please consider leaving a like, comment, subscribe, or whatever it is you feel like doing. Thanks again, and have a nice day.